Okay, let's do this one more time. Spider-Verse is out, and apparently the greatest movie to have ever been movied. Cinema has peaked, the film industry is climaxed, and the only movie that needs to come out now is Beyond the Spider-Verse, which can't possibly be as good, but we'll all give it a pass. After that, movies are officially over. We've seen as good as it can get.
Pack it up, people. We had a good run, but the party is over. We can all spend the rest of our lives playing Tears of the Kingdom now. I know it's been months, but I still haven't found Zelda.
Okay, so obviously movies aren't going anywhere for the foreseeable future, but Across the Spider-Verse has already reached critical acclaim amongst movie critics and animation lovers alike that will confidently place it among the heavily referenced and meticulously studied movies of future movie makers. From their use of color and the blending of styles, to the themes of fates we rise to and those we reject, both Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse are raising the standards of what animated movies, and quite frankly, movies in general can be. But if you wanted an analytical review of these movies, then I'm not the person to listen to. I'm not an animator, nor a comic book fan. Hell, I'm not even a movie buff. What I am is a ranter and an overthinker. So I want to take Across the Spider-Verse not as the subject of my video, but as a catalyst. What I want to talk about isn't how good Spider-Verse is in the now. What I want to talk about is whether movies can be better in the future. What happens now? Well, I'm going to rant about it. I'm not going to pretend that I've extensively engrossed myself in movie culture and cinematic techniques, but you don't need to have a PhD in directorial cameramaness to see how far movies have progressed from their inception in 1895. From black and white silent films, to talkies, to color, to animation and CGI, movies have one of the clearest evolutions viewable in an artistic medium. The average viewer may not understand how or why something new is now possible, but we can definitely see that the change has occurred. Animation itself has had its own evolution over time. 1937 Snow White is referred to as the first feature-length animated film, but in 1917 an Argentinian stop-motion paper cutout film 70 minutes long was released only to the residents of Buenos Aires. 8 months before Snow White released, Le Roman de Renard, or The Tale of the Fox, premiered in France as the second stop-motion puppet feature film. Of course, Snow White is still the first hand-drawn feature film in animation, pioneered by a Disney that had been experimenting with animation as a whole for 9 years previous. But by the time Disney seemed to have created the animated movie genre, it had actually already evolved from several interpretations of animation as an art. And that would only continue at an exponential rate. In the 1940s, there was a heavy emphasis on wartime animations showing patriotism and courage for one's country, and that was across the board. Japan released its first fully animated feature in 1945, called Momotaro Umi no Shinpei, or Sacred Sailor, as one of these propaganda animations. 3 years later would see the creation of one of the biggest anime studios today, Toei Animation, the creative minds behind Yu-Gi-Oh!, Sailor Moon, and Dragon Ball Z. In fact, before 1950, Poland, Canada, and Russia all had animation studios that are still around today. And this mattered because different art styles and ways of telling animated stories started circulating, though not as much as they do today. Seeing these films was hard, considering there was no internet, and these early films were made on, well, film. So unless you had traveled to these countries, the chances that you'd see a foreign animated film were slim. But even with the limitations of a less connected world, you can still see the Disney influence in works like Britain's first animated feature film, 1954's Animal Farm. Later, Disney would be influenced by Japan's emerging art style we recognize as anime today. Philo Barnhart, an original Disney animator on The Little Mermaid, said that Ariel was Disney's attempt at a Disney-fied anime girl influenced by the work of legendary Studio Ghibli director and animator Hayao Miyazaki, creating the big-eyed look we now recognize as the Disney princess look. And in turn, Miyazaki was influenced by the French animated film Le Roi et l'Oiseau.
Le Roi L'oiseau.
Or The King and the Mockingbird, a film started in the 1930s and revitalized in the 80s. Animation was becoming its own melting pot of ideas and influences as the space grew and more diverse voices were able to share their visions with audiences. Then in 1990, Disney released The Rescuers Down Under, the first fully digitally created film. CGI had been used in films previous to this, like when Ariel runs down these stairs in The Little Mermaid, or the cinematic Big Ben scene in The Great Mouse Detective. But now, computer animation was going to be the only way Disney would make animated films in the future. And this didn't mean immediately jumping to the Pixar style we're familiar with now. Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, A Goofy Movie, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, these would all be movies created in the digital space, but in the familiar 2D animated style of the 80s. But the big 2D animated movies would face their greatest challenge in 1995. One even Disney couldn't beat. Pixar's Toy Story changed the animated movie landscape forever. Again, I'm not an animator, nor am I a movie expert, but even I can tell you that when Toy Story released, it hit hard, making millions of dollars on opening week and becoming the second highest grossing movie of 1995, just behind Die Hard with a Vengeance. It catapulted stardom immediately, becoming one of the most influential, if not the most influential, animated movies of all time. And that influence is something that would be felt for the next 20 years. Technology would just keep improving from Pixar's early days, and 3D computer-generated animated films would start to take over the scene. From DreamWorks and Shrek to Illumination and Despicable Me, new animation studios would arise to challenge the chokehold Disney had on children's media with the help of computer animation, adopting a Pixar-esque style of rounded character designs with smooth textures and big features and a search for realism. Even Disney would drop its 2D animation formula after The Princess and the Frog to move towards an entirely 3D animation format, creating the big hits we are all familiar with today. And that's not to say that 2D animation is fully dead. This history is very American-centric, not including the continuing greatness of works by Studio Ghibli or Makoto Shinkai, and ignoring works like Song of the Sea, a gorgeous 2014 film from Irish animation studio Cartoon Saloon, which has produced multiple 2D animation films with Best Animated Feature nominations. 2D animation isn't dead around the world, but it isn't as prevalent as it once was. Especially when you include all the foreign Disney ripoffs that pump out awful 3D animated films like TikTok pumps out bad DIY hacks. Which leads us to the present day and Sony Animation's Spider-Verse. It wasn't the first movie to break from the Pixar style. Movies like the Peanuts movie took inspiration from their source material to create their own look, and the short Paperman is well regarded for its blending of 2D and 3D. But Spider-Verse went all in on creating a comic book style completely its own, and 5 years later we are seeing movies, big animation movies, embracing this new look of style, purposeful simplicity and abstract art over the constant goal of realism, in Pixar eyes. DreamWorks in particular has found great success with their dabble in the bad guys and their all-out embracing of the style in Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And with Across the Spider-Verse already getting even more praise than its predecessor, I don't think it's crazy to predict that more and more serious animation studios are going to try and adopt the Spider-Verse style. But what happens then? What's next? It's kinda hard to think of the next technological leap because it feels like we've hit the end of what we can do with a movie. We made 2D images move, we made them 3-dimensional, we even have 2D and 3D together with live action. We have Rotoscope making 2D out of live action, we have AI adding 2D art to 3D models, we have live action being covered in CG to the point it's practically animation. It's tough to conceptualize what going bigger could mean. Smell-o-vision, VR movies, everything feels like a novelty that is already possible but won't change movies. At least not in the way they've changed before. And there is a catch. Movies are a business. Across the Spider-Verse took a long time to animate with one character taking 3 years to perfect. Looking at all the work artists and animators of the film have released, it is clear that Across the Spider-Verse was a labor of intense love. It is doing great at the box office right now, but is it doing so well that it will encourage other studios to spend that time and creativity to lovingly craft their own stylized and inventive movies? Or will the cost and time outweigh the benefits of a great movie? Will they ultimately determine that quick, good enough releases are just better investments? Already we're hearing news of potential crunch for the last installment of the Spider-Verse series, and if the studio that's making these artistically intensive movies doesn't want to give them the time they need, why would we expect big studios like Disney, who practically make a film every year, to be any better? And we have to consider the impact of streaming as well. It may not be a technical advancement to movies themselves, but streaming has changed the movie landscape forever. Audiences don't buy DVDs like they used to, and they don't go to movie theaters like they used to either. And that's not entirely bad. I certainly enjoy the freedom to take chances on films like Over the Moon or The Sea Beast without worrying about the money for the ticket if I don't end up liking them. I also love the variety of foreign animation I get to watch, like Green Snake or Words Bubble Up Like Soda Pop, that I would never have watched otherwise. We even have new movies like Nimona that were rejected by traditional studios but find a home in streaming. But streaming does mean less incentive for movie audiences to actually get up and pay for a new movie experience. This could mean studios work harder to make those experiences more appealing by making them bigger spectacles, which could mean tons of projects just like Spider-Verse designed to amaze you into the theater over and over because they're that beautiful. Most people don't have the sound systems and large screens of a proper theater, and the fact the movie works so well in that environment could be a draw for audiences. But the failing of the traditional movie industry could also mean lowering budgets for films that aren't designated as big blockbusters. Would Sony have taken a chance on a film designed like Spider-Verse if there wasn't an incredibly beloved IP attached to it? I hope I'm wrong. I really hope this shows animation studios that experimentation is good and that audiences will see something that breaks the Disney Pixar tradition, and that movies are great and can make money. But I have my doubts. And they're not helped by the fact Across the Spider-Verse has another potential problem when looking towards the future of the franchise and animation in general. And that's its story. More specifically, it's because the Spider-Verse story started as big as you can get. Spider-Verse is an explosion of references and callbacks, from the Peter Parkers of the live-action universe to the Polygon Spidey of Insomniac Games. There were Spider-Cats and Spider-Horses, Spider-Sonas turned canon, and Spider-Means from Fanon. Truly, those who are grossed in spider culture are spoiled by this cornucopia of superhero-level love. But what happens after you get spoiled? What do you do next when you've gone beyond the very universe your story began with? It might just mean ending the Spider-Verse. Or it could mean subscribing to this channel. Just a thought, don't mind me. It's hard to walk a story back to simple plots, even if the story started with humble roots. It's not impossible, but I certainly don't envy someone who has to take an audience that has experienced the spectacular high of a world saved with daring feats of will and courage and move them to a plot about the local pet shop closing at Christmas. Those can both create powerful stories that resonate with people, but they're just very different, well, vibes. Getting bigger in scope is easy. That's the basic Marvel movie formula for every superhero ever. Start with something personal and build up to the fate of the multiverse. But once your characters have reached that level of influence on their world, the small stuff just doesn't feel as important anymore. The audience just has too big of expectations for the character now. And Spider-Man is hitting that plateau where there just isn't anything bigger than what you've already gotten. In Into the Spider-Verse, you started with a team of odd Spider-Men and the first Miles Morales debut. And Across the Spider-Verse, it increased the number of Spider-Men to the whole of the Spider community, with plenty of references to cover almost every avenue of the Spider-Man franchise. And not to be outdone, the live-action Marvel Spider-Man films recently had a huge movie with all three live-action Spider-Men teaming up against their greatest villains in No Way Home. Another love letter to the live-action Spider-Man fans that have adored the various interpretations of the character since Tobey Maguire's iconic portrayal in 2002. How can either portrayals of the character get any bigger? What's more fulfilling than a whole movie that's both endearing and brimming with fan service? What happens after you've explored the multiverse? If you have ever looked up a YouTube video explaining just one comic book event, then you know understanding a comic timeline is like explaining the lore of Five Nights at Freddy's. Overly complicated and a full-time job. So, to answer this question, I asked the resident comic book lover in my life, Darling, to do the research for me. Okay, Darling, what happens after the multiverse?
Okay, well, after the Crisis on Infinite Earths in '85, most of the multiverse is gone except for the Pocket Dimension that also has Superman, Superboy Prime, Lois Lane, and Alex Luthor. But Lois Lane is dying. So they come back for Infinite Crisis, where they break out of that parallel dimension, try to reform the multiverse, and take over.
How about you just do this part?
Let me start by saying this. Not all multiverse events are created equal. There are big, small, and middling multiverse events with different purposes and levels of consequence. DC does a ton of big multiverse events, while Marvel usually does smaller ones focusing on in-universe. I'll define big multiverse events as those that involve the entire comics universe at the time. Afterward, every single comic series is changed somehow because the entire world has changed. The hallmark for this is that all series by that publisher, Marvel or DC, restart at issue 1. The first was DC's Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985 and 1986 as a way of correcting the timeline and changing tone to make fans happy. Now, publishers can't help but use multiverse stories to change style and please the market. They change around the number of universes, the timeline, the genre, the character ages, character memories, everything, into whatever they think will make fans happy. DC alone has destroyed the multiverse so there's only one universe, recreated a limited multiverse, expanded the multiverse, made a dark multiverse, on and on and on and on. Inside the comics, characters also change. This can be a rebirth, where characters start from a blank slate and have their origin stories in modern day, or these can be a restyle, where parts of the world are changed and characters have to adapt to this new world. One such restyle is after 2008's Final Crisis. Batman dies, and Dick Grayson has to fill in the role for a bit while the rest of the Batman community deals with the repercussions. Until Bruce Wayne comes back, obviously. Marvel does big multiverse events rarely, and they are almost entirely restyles. In 2015, the Secret Wars destroyed and remade the universe, but with minor changes. It really just fused the main Marvel universe and the Ultimate Marvel universe, the one where Peter Parker died and Miles Morales became Spider-Man. Aside from that, most things went back to the way they were, with only a few characters experiencing lasting impacts from the reset. House of M dealt with a potential destruction of the world and a creation of a new one by Scarlet Witch, but then Marvel kind of undid most of the major changes and put it in another universe instead of the main timeline. Marvel also has an omniverse that contains all multiverses to explain away stuff like pure what-if storylines, such as Marvel Zombies, that have almost no interaction with the main multiverse. Well, unless you count the Marvel What If comics series from 1976, which then got made into a TV show, which then got roped into Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. God damn it, people cannot leave things alone. Completely opposite the big multiverse events are no consequence crossover style events. These are also rare and are used to create wacky scenarios that play out with no consequences. Think of the various Marvel and DC crossovers, where everyone's mind gets wiped to the events before they return home. Or any crossover in Scooby-Doo, or the Riverdale Archie world. In the middle are events that have some stakes, have a limited cast, and might have lasting impact but only on the people involved. This is where Spider-Verse lands. The Spider-Verse saga has in-universe stakes, but not ones that extend far beyond anyone whose name doesn't start with Spider. Some background. The Spider-Verse in the comics has 3 main events, one of which just wrapped up in 2022. The Spider-Verse, Spider-Geddon, and the end of the Spider-Verse. They're a series about a group called the Inheritors, who want to kill and absorb/eat all spider people for what I affectionately call dumb bullshit lore reasons. The canon web from Across the Spider-Verse is actually the Web of Life and Destiny. There's a magic dagger and great spider totems. It's... Who am I kidding? It's cool as f***, but it's campy as all hell. There are a ton of cool spider people introduced in this saga, like Sun Spider, Spider's Man, Spider-Rex, and many others that are killed off shortly after appearing. There are a number of ways that the story progressed for the characters involved with the first Spider-Verse event. The first is spin-offs. The first Spider-Verse event was the launching point for a few characters who went on to get their own series in some capacity. The biggest of them was Ghost Spider, aka Spider-Gwen. Due to overwhelming popularity and fantastic design by Jason Latour and Robbie Rodriguez, she got her own full series. That is f***ing incredible. For Spider-Gwen, it starts off being exclusively about her and her universe, until one multiverse event happens. Then another, until in 2022 there's just a series called Gwenverse. The Web Warriors was another spin-off involving a group of newly introduced spider people that dealt entirely with separate multiverse events, such as the team-up of Electros across the multiverse. More recently, we've seen a resurgence in some characters after their involvement with the Spider-Verse event. It turns out that Peter Porker, the Spider-Ham, came from a gag run in 1983, had his own series 1985 to 87, and due to the popularity of the Spider-Verse movie, got a few comics of his own in 2019 and a few graphic novels starting in 2021. Spider-Noir also had his own comic in 2009, then was heavily present in the 2010 video game Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. He got another run starting in 2019 after Into the Spider-Verse's popularity. Aside from the new characters, everyone else goes through one of a few arcs. Return to Normal. This is where the series goes back to its original formula. Cindy Moon, also known as Silk, goes back to her original world and the comic proceeds as normal. She does not go through great personal growth, nor did her world significantly change due to the events of the Spider-Verse. Reflection. This is where the world doesn't necessarily change, but the character does. Main world Jessica Drew and Peter Parker basically return to the worlds they were in and jump back into the problems they were dealing with. They go through some character growth because of their Spider-Verse interactions. Peter Parker embraces his leadership side more, and Jessica Drew leaves the Avengers. That said, they largely go back to business as usual. They are changed, but the world is not. Revolution. This is where both the world and the character have changed. Miguel O'Hara tries to return to his own time after the Spider-Verse, things go wrong, and after Secret Wars, he ends up back in main timeline Earth. He goes through a period of great tragedy and intense introspection as a result of the multiverse and in-universe events. Does he want to be Spider-Man? Can he fix timelines without destroying them? This leads to what is currently the conclusion of the Spider-Man 2099 run in 2017, though of course he reappears in other Spider-Verse events because you cannot let a man rest. Regardless of what happens to the multiverse and the characters, this is still comics. Things go back to a rough status quo, and characters can only grow as long as they are still recognizable and familiar. This is true after in-universe and multiverse events. In DC Multiverse comics, Flash dies and comes back, other Flash dies and comes back, Batman dies and comes back, Flash dies and comes back again, etc. I did not want to learn this much about the DC Multiverse and timeline, but God has cursed me for my hubris, and my work is never finished. In the Marvel Multiverse event, House of M, almost all mutants lose their powers, except they either get them back by the end of the series, or within a year or two in the comics. Oh my god, if I had a nickel for every time Hawkeye died in the 2010s in a Crisis event caused by an unhinged Wanda Maximoff only to be brought back to life by her at the end of the event, I would have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. In the main timeline event World War Hulk, the entire world of superheroes turns against a Bruce Banner Hulk who wants revenge. Until shortly afterward when everyone is friends again. Comic book events are messy, but they always get cleaned up. The difference is that multiverse events will always get messy again. Here's the thing about the Spider-Verse aftermath. These old and new characters come back for the next Spider-Verse event. Everything that DC learned about messing with the big multiverses applies to the smaller Spider-Verse. It's messy, it's a cool way to introduce new ideas and stories, it helps you keep comics fresh, and as a result, it's really hard to leave it alone. It's like Pringles, once you pop, you can't stop. Each Spider-Verse event is written to be the last, to leave just enough threads for the characters to interact if it's warranted, but to close off the story. But you've introduced a multiverse, so why wouldn't you play with it again?
So after looking at the inner workings of the multiverse in superhero comics, I have come to the conclusion that it can't work the same way for movies. In comics, it's normal to revert to the status quo and find a different villain to fight, another flaw to overcome, or a new style to explore. But movies aren't a series of small bites that can build into a better meal. They take more effort to make, more time to wait, and more money to see. And I don't think it's outrageous to say audiences are feeling a bit of fatigue from the surplus of comic book content we've been getting. Specifically, multiverse comic book content. The Avengers movies were great. I loved waiting for the cinematic ending in Endgame. It was an incredible journey that led to 4 of the top 10 highest grossing movies of all time. But every movie can't be part of a 10-movie long plan that ends in a massive multiverse crossover. The animated Spider-Verse movies are phenomenal, but after this trilogy, do we really just want another set of multiverse movies? Do we really just keep going down the line of superheroes until we reach Arm Fall-Off Boy's multiverse of muscles? And that's ignoring the narrative restrictions these kind of movies can place. Not every character can share Miles' journey of self-discovery. It already is highly repetitive that every superhero's origin story involves dead parents. Can you imagine going to a movie and seeing the same depressed teen with dead parents learning to believe in themselves that you just saw last month? I could, and probably will, write a whole rant about why it's important that stories have planned and prompt endings. But what I want to impress upon you is the fact that while Spider-Verse is amazing and fully deserves the love it has received, it can't improve by giving us the same multiverse story but with a different coat of paint. In fact, I don't think it can improve at all. So I think it should end. Miles will have had his character arc completed by the 3rd movie. Probably. And any attempt to continue the universe beyond that seems fated to be compared and falls short of this trilogy. You might be thinking that Spider-Gwen and Hobie would make great spin-offs, and you are partially right, because they are incredible characters. But what would their stories lead up to? Would everyone really be satisfied with a single universe Gwen movie where she fought her Green Goblin? Or would you be waiting for a reference to Miles and a hint that the whole gang would be back together soon? It would almost be destined to lead to another multiverse event, or be an origin story which was already covered in the Miles trilogy. I argue that Spider-Verse should end on the highest of notes and be committed to being the greatest form of itself in completion. And then a new animated movie can surprise us with its storytelling and artistic flair. Though, I guess that's another concern of mine. A movie like The Last Wish can't experiment with style in the same way as Across the Spider-Verse. Making the Bears and Goldilocks a Renaissance sketch just wouldn't make sense in the context of the plot. It's Spider-Verse's script and world that enables the art direction of the movies to be so unique. But every animated movie can't be a multiverse movie. Every animated movie can't be an action film with characters that move and fight in crazy unique ways. And every animated movie can't be a previous IP with decades of history and properties to reference. And that makes me feel like we'll never get anything as special as Spider-Verse ever again, because it was the perfect cocktail of nostalgia and new ideas that hits you in the chest, even if you were just a casual Spider-Man fan. I know I sound really pessimistic about the future of animation and Spider-Man. As evidenced with Into the Spider-Verse, it takes quite a bit of effort to encourage audiences to see an animated film not specifically made for their children. It takes word of mouth, which relies on a vocal minority praising your movie as a must-see masterpiece. And that is not a safe bet to make as a studio. It takes a lot of time to make your art special, and it may need to rely on previously established IPs to even get off the ground. Animation costs so much to make right now in an already struggling industry, and amateur projects, no matter how meticulously worked on, aren't going to get the same screen time as a major studio's rushed work. Studios only care about profit, and ordinary people need money to live, so there is very little incentive for artists to strive to make bigger and better movies. And it feels really hopeless. Like capitalism and inflation and monopolies and the growing necessity of high-end computers, combined with their incredibly ridiculous prices and AI taking over artists' work through blatant theft, makes it impossible for artists with great ideas to even make it to the starting line. And I understand that. But much like Miles Morales, I reject this future. I reject any future that tells me art is doomed to be the same until it dies. When I ask, what now? I don't ask it somberly, as if accepting that movies are finished. I ask it with joy and excitement, because I, as a casual watcher of animation, don't have the answers, but somewhere someone out there does. Because Spider-Verse exists. Because Toy Story exists. Because Snow White exists. Because there have always been reasons why animation and stories could not grow. There have always been limits everyone thought they couldn't be crossed. And there have always been people who did it anyway. A movie couldn't be entirely computer generated. Another studio's film can't beat Disney's. A foreign movie can't do well in America. But these films exist, most often unexpectedly. So I believe we have so much more to look forward to now. We have a D&D campaign turned cartoon superstar after the most funded Kickstarter campaign for movies or TV. We have streaming bringing us movies deemed too risque for traditional studios. And we have Spider-Verse, a movie that has artists and animators crying from how beautiful and experimental an animated movie can be. I fully believe we have so much good animation coming to us in the future. That animation will continue to grow and evolve and be challenged by the young artists and animators who are watching these movies now as they grow up and form their own styles. And by you, audience members who care enough about animation to think critically and believe in the possibilities. So maybe the better question isn't what now? Maybe it's better to ask, what's next?